This week on The Record, St. Louis Board of Aldermen President Megan Green on homelessness, poverty, crime, and missing marijuana money. Senator Eric Schmidt on Israel, Palestine, China, and the legacy of Henry Kissinger and his role in all of it. Darren Bailey and Congressman Mike Bost battle it out in line to get on the ballot. And Governor Mike Parson's rebuke of a Republican pushing for a refugee ban. It's all coming up right now. Welcome to The Record. I'm Mark Maxwell. As we approach the end of the calendar year, a new tradition takes hold at City Hall. The Board of Aldermen President, Megan Green, kicked off a legislative report, which sounded a lot like a State of the City address, if you will. Board of Aldermen President Megan Green joins us now. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me back.
You talked a lot about poverty, homelessness, and housing in your speech. That might have been the main takeaway. I think you're nodding your head, perhaps
Yes.
agreeing with that. But you sort of celebrated a lot of things that you have achieved on your agenda. That unhoused Bill of Rights, though, failed spectacularly. It went up in smoke. It didn't even get out of the committee, I believe.
It is not dead.
It's not dead yet.
Correct.
Okay. You called it a critical stepping stone.
Yes. So
Was it a stepping stone or was it a step back?
I think it's a stepping stone. It started the conversation that we have to have. And what we need to understand with this new board is that our decisions are not just yes and no decisions. That when we have major issues that need to be tackled, such as how we care for our unhoused population, we are not going to stop having those conversations. We are going to continue to push them forward, introduce legislation until we get to something that we can build consensus around. There's no more passing the buck.
What went wrong in that negotiation?
You know, I think we tried to do a little bit too much too fast. We're figuring out what are the most tangible things that we can get done right now that are going to have the most immediate impact, while also creating a plan for what we need to do long term to expand shelter capacity in particular.
You yourself have said there are some practical and real deadlines just with the cold weather approaching.
Yes.
There are hundreds of people still without housing or temporary shelter perhaps that could use something more than just a tent.
Yes.
St. Peter and Paul has money in hand from the city.
Yes.
They just have nowhere to go to build.
Yes.
Where can they go? Is there a part of the city that some planning has been done? You say, hey, I think that can work for them to go. Can we just get the agreement around it?
Yeah, we have not been able to find that place as of yet. And part of the reason that we can't is because of the antiquated plat and petition process. I think that we do have an understanding at the board now that this process is a problem. There is not comfort in repealing it altogether. So the question is, what do we replace it with that allows for communities to have a voice in what this process looks like, but also make sure that we actually are allowing shelters to open? Because this issue is only going to get worse as we continue to see shelters close without others opening in their place.
People that are unhoused for too long might become victims of crime or perhaps perpetrators of it if they're caught up in some kind of a cycle, and then they might end up at the City Justice Center. That's a place where you've called for change.
Yes.
But I don't know exactly what that change looks like. The mayor has stood by the commissioner of the jail. You've wanted to see change. Are you and the mayor pushing in different directions on this? What do you want to see exactly?
I think that the bill that Alderman Aldrich passed a couple weeks ago that strengthened the Detention Facilities Oversight Board is a really great step in that direction.
Sort of. The question remains, are you satisfied with the job that the commissioner is doing now, or would you like to see a replacement?
I would like to see us at a place where we no longer have deaths in the jail, where we have the staffing that is necessary to make sure that inmates' needs are taken care of and cared for. Whether that is something we can achieve through the current commissioner, I'm still not sure. I do think, though, that the administration has been taking the criticism seriously and has been putting in place steps to rectify some of the past challenges, specifically when it comes to hiring medical staff to get into the Justice Center. In E&A, we just approved maybe a month ago changing over some of the positions so that medical staff from the city can be in there while we're looking for a new medical contractor.
And we've been talking about two different constituencies, I suppose, that may not vote very much. People that are behind bars and people that don't have a house or a mailing address right now. If I can use a crass term like this, more influential voting block of small business owners who their ears perked up quite a bit during your inaugural address. We talked about a red tape commission, cutting through a lot of red tape, things like liquor licenses, things that make it hard to get out and actually conduct business in the city of St. Louis. That was missing from your speech. It seems to have faded from your agenda. Have you found that hard to get done, or what's going on there?
We are reformulating at the moment, so I think it's
back to the drawing board.
It's the committee is not going away, but we are gearing up in the new year to bring forth, I think, a new vision for that committee to get it moving a little bit faster. Have had a lot of conversations with Alderman Narayan on moving forward the liquor licensing bill. We do anticipate that in the new year that will move forward. We have some other regulations around food trucks and things like that we expect to bring forth as well.
One other budget wrinkle that I think some of our viewers were curious to learn about. Just last week we learned about $500,000 in money went up in smoke. The marijuana money that could have come into the city coffers didn't. Who's ultimately responsible for this? The mayor's office said they weren't sure. We've heard just some back and forth. Does the Board of Aldermen, do you bear any responsibility for this accounting error that cost the city $500,000?
Yeah, I mean, the way that we look at it is as soon as our office was notified that there was an issue, we went through state law, we looked at what was supposed to be done, started bringing together the information, took it to the mayor's office, who very quickly then contacted the state. I think that nobody is quite 100% sure where the buck stops, but I do know that I think the board did our job by passing it and putting it on the ballot. I think that the voters did their job by approving it. I think we have to be looking at our policies at City Hall to make sure that once something passes, that the administration of it actually moves forward.
It sounds like, to voters that hear that, I can imagine that sounds frustrating because they're like, well, who ultimately was responsible here? Where's that answer in your mind?
In my mind, I think that it does fall in administrative functions for the city. But I also understand that there have been times where the Board of Elections and other entities have been the ones to put that forward. So I think going forward, we need to make sure that there are clear policies, both from the mayor's office and from E&A and for the Board of Elections, so that there's understanding of who is responsible for what by when.
All right, I guess you could say just about halfway to the State of the City address. We've got this legislative report from the Board of Aldermen President. Thank you for going back and recapping that with us and for joining us here again.
Thank you so much.
Former President Trump revives an old pledge to axe Obamacare. Will Republicans help him do it? Senator Eric Schmidt weighs in next. Diplomacy brokered a temporary truce in war-torn Gaza, allowing aid trucks in, refugees out, hostages released in a prisoner swap, and a pause in that wide-scale killing. But long-term issues remain in the push for peace in the Middle East. Missouri Senator Eric Schmidt is now on the record. Thanks for joining us. On Tuesday, President Biden said in a post online that Hamas unleashed a terrorist attack because they fear nothing more than Israelis and Palestinians living side by side in peace. And to continue down the path of terror, violence, killing, and war is to give Hamas what they seek. And we can't do that. You called that a dangerously confusing message. What part of it is confusing to you?
It seems to indicate that Hamas, wants a two-state solution, and that it indicates, in my view, a bit of a pivot. There's no secret here that Joe Biden's getting a lot of pressure from Democrats and those on the left to sort of tell Israel to stand down. That's just sort of out there, obviously. So the tweet was confusing. I think they've sought to clarify it since then. So I just hope that we give Israel the moral and diplomatic support they need to do to wipe out this terrorist organization that unleashed really terrible acts on October 7th that we actually had in a private screening this week. Senators were invited to see the actual footage of that was captured on GoPro cameras by these terrorists. And you could have heard a pin drop. It's terrible stuff. So anyway, I just want to make sure that the president isn't sending mixed signals here.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the Netanyahu government wants a two-state solution?
I don't know. I think it's very difficult right now to look into the future when they're really having an existential threat to their very survival. I mean, you clearly have Hamas is dedicated to wiping Israel off the map. And so I think that they're dealing with that. You've got underground tunnels that they're trying to dismantle. They're, again, fighting for their very survival. So I don't think it's up to us to tell them how to go do that.
Yeah. On another matter of foreign policy, you were critical of President Biden's recent meeting with China's President Xi Jinping. You said, quote, healthy cooperation is not possible with the Chinese Communist Party that is hell-bent on global domination. China is now, after that meeting, pledging publicly to crack down on chemical companies that make the ingredients that supply fentanyl. Do you see that as healthy cooperation?
They've done that before, Mark. and they've never actually followed through. They also pledged that they weren't going to build islands in the South China Sea. They told Obama that, and they've done that, and now they're fully weaponized. I think we have to recognize that the Communist Party in China runs the place, and that they are hell-bent on world domination. They have a bigger navy than we have right now, Mark. They're in space in a serious way. President Biden misunderstands or miscalculates the nature of this relationship. They're our chief adversary. And we've never had one like this before. That's a real, military rival, that's a nuclear power, but also an economic rival. And so any dollars that China reaps from any of these bogus trade deals, not just with the United States, but across the world, goes directly into their military designs. And so I think it's a mistake. I think it's naive to believe that they're going to cooperate with us in any way other than them try to supplant the United States.
And Henry Kissinger died this week, Wednesday, a longtime shaper of American foreign policy in that region. President Xi wrote to President Biden and said this, quote, "Dr. Kissinger will always be remembered and missed by the Chinese people." How should the American people remember Henry Kissinger?
Well, I mean, he was clearly a student of realpolitik, right? And I think that understanding the nature of your adversaries is very, very important. And I appreciate that. And I think that right now we're in a different world with China than we were back in the early 1970s. China is no longer sort of this trade partner with a huge population that is seen as poor and people want to open up trade deals. I mean, they have sort of shown their fangs here. In the last decade. Xi Jinping is the most brutal dictator in the world, perhaps. I mean, he has concentration camps in China right now with the Uyghurs. So I just think we have to understand that we're worlds away from when Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon went to China in the early 70s.
I see. On a matter closer to home now, you've seen this push to expel George Santos from the House, and I know rules in the Senate are much different, but should the Senate expel Bob Menendez?
Oh, that hasn't come up, Mark. If that's a serious, push, I think that's a question for Chuck Schumer and the Democrats.
Well, Senator John Fetterman is calling to expel him. Would you support that?
That was like 2 months ago and nothing's happened. So again, I'd probably direct your question related to Bob Menendez to Chuck Schumer. I mean, they've not done anything about it. It's nothing more than a hypothetical at this point that doesn't look like it's ever going to come to the Senate floor.
All right. Well, real quick, while we have you, just this week, President Trump renewed his 2016 pledge to scrap the Affordable Care Act after John McCain intervened in 2017 and defeated that effort. After that, the Democrats would go on to win control of the House in 2018, often running on and campaigning on promises to protect and expand Obamacare. Republicans would later start to embrace that policy. So all these years later, would you vote now to get rid of Obamacare?
I think that we should always be looking for health reforms that make healthcare more affordable. For all the promises of Obamacare, healthcare is way more expensive than it's ever been. And so you combine the reckless spending of the Biden administration, you combine the war on domestic energy production, you combine these policies that have made it more expensive for working families. That's why most people think the country's heading in the wrong direction, including Democrats, by the way. And so, I've always been an advocate for fighting for real reform. And so we'll see what those proposals are.
All right, Senator, thanks.
Thanks, Mark.
Hundreds of layoffs at a Metro East steel plant, the blowback from a local member of Congress, and why Governor Mike Parson is calling out a Missouri House Republican. Local political headlines coming up next. Workers at U.S. Steel in Granite City are steeling themselves for tough news. The company announcing Wednesday it will idle the plant indefinitely and lay off up to 600 workers. U.S. Steel executives claimed its initial decision back in September was in response to that United Auto Workers strike. So with that strike over and workers back in action, the president of the United Steelworkers Local 1899 says the company should be ramping up production, not slowing down. Congresswoman Nikki Budzinski released a statement in response, saying in part that it's clear the company's executives are more concerned with lining their own pockets than they are with the livelihoods of the workers who have built their company for generations. On Thursday, she announced she's calling for an investigation into those layoffs. And a group from North St. Louis County visited Capitol Hill, demanding Congress deliver funding for people impacted by radioactive waste in our area. Just Moms STL wants top military budget negotiators not to strip that compensation for radiation contamination victims out of the final version of the National Defense Authorization Act.
The legislation is kind of stuck, and we're going to meet with him and find out if there are ways while we're here to unstick it and what we can do. We just really felt like we needed to be here in person to make these connections one more time and really tell our stories in person to see if we can move whoever is in the way.
The House and Senate could huddle in a conference this week to decide what stays in that final military spending bill. Senator Josh Hawley has threatened to use every tool at his disposal to hold it up if it does not include compensation for those victims. It's off to the races in Illinois. Candidates filed petitions to appear on the March primary ballot on Monday. The first big showdown in southern Illinois between five-term incumbent Congressman Mike Bost and his challenger Darren Bailey.
What does experience get us?
Well, experience has gotten us a lot.
You've got a do-nothing candidate, a do-nothing congressman, and he really is. I mean, when you consider the representation and the conservative values of the 12th congressional district, the district is too conservative for the congressman.
I'm a governing conservative. I have a 100% pro-life record. I have a great rating and have always been endorsed by the NRA. My votes are very, very clear that they are conservative. So why would someone want to change?
We'll find that answer on March 19 when voters head to the polls. Missouri Governor Mike Parson rebuked Missouri House Republican Chris Dinkins for her broad calls for a ban on all refugees from an entire war-torn region. In a letter to Parson, Dinkins said Missouri should send a strong message about our values. She expressed great concern about welcoming individuals from regions whose belief systems are rooted in anti-American and anti-Israel sentiments. Parson rejected those calls to paint civilians with such a broad brush.
There's a big difference between Palestinian people and the people of Hamas. Hamas are terrorist groups that attack our country and hate who we are. We don't want them here under no circumstances whatsoever. But I don't think you want to take everybody that's from Palestine to make them as bad people. I don't know that.
Parson also noted that Dinkins had asked him to do something he doesn't have the legal power to do, adding that it's federal agencies, not state governments, that set immigration and refugee policy. We dig into that call for a ban on Palestinian refugees next when we check the record. Missouri Republicans this week debated America's role and responsibility in providing aid or shelter to Palestinian civilians, refugees of war who fled their bombarded homes. For example, Representative Chris Lonsdale tweeted, "Our taxpayer dollars should go to Missourians, not non-citizen refugees." He was talking about federal tax dollars there, so let's check the record. On December 7, 1948, Missouri's own Harry Truman recommended Congress spend $16 million to provide aid to 500,000 Palestinian refugees all those years ago. Sure, that was 75 years back, but Missouri's most prestigious political leaders have found it palatable, popular, and indeed proper to provide food, clothing, and shelter to refugees in need from that same part of the world, no less. His colleague, Representative Chris Dinkins, who's running for the state Senate, had said, "It is imperative that we take a clear stand in opposition to refugee resettlement in Missouri," because she feared their, quote, belief systems and predicted many individuals from the Gaza Strip would bring, quote, divisive and dangerous ideologies here. Let's set aside for a moment the fact that in questioning the belief systems of those refugees, Dinkins appears to run roughshod over the First Amendment's clear ban on government establishing religious litmus tests. We'll set that controversy aside to focus instead on her contradiction of another famous Republican. Dinkins likes to quote Ronald Reagan, so we will too. On July 30th, 1981, Reagan said, "Our nation is a nation of immigrants. More than any other country, our strength comes from our own immigrant heritage and our capacity to welcome those from other lands." But her bigotry goes beyond American boundaries. Dinkins doesn't want Palestinians here and apparently doesn't want them in Gaza or the West Bank either. She shared a map of those territories on her Facebook page and said it was the Lord Jesus Christ who designated that territory as the Jewish homeland. Then later in the same post said, quote, "Don't buy the Palestinian lies that they are entitled to the land." We're not going to pretend we can settle one of the world's most protracted territorial disputes in a TV program, but we can hold her comments up to the light of history and compare those remarks to the record. Republican leaders before her, including those who have won statewide races in Missouri, have argued that Palestinians are entitled to at least some of that land. And perhaps a two-state solution could play a major role in solving the refugee crisis, too. Take this, for example. On May 12, 2008, in an interview with an Egyptian TV station, President George W. Bush said now is the time for the development of a Palestinian state that has got defined borders that doesn't look like Swiss cheese. In other words, it's contiguous territory, in his words, where the refugee issue is dealt with. Republicans then and now have warned against religious extremism or dangerous dogmas that would deny people a chance to live in peace. That's all of our time this week. We'll see you next week. Until then, we're off the record. If you're looking for more context, accountability, or scrutiny of your politicians, The Record will broadcast every Sunday. Each week, we'll put political leaders on the record for hard-hitting interviews that are fair, balanced, and focused on facts. Tune in every Sunday night after Sports Plus. The show will continue to stream on ksdk.com, 5 Plus, and our YouTube.